we've got a great guest for you guys on the revolution here. Khalil Sawyer is executive director and founder of Agora Initiative, a political analyst focused on Palestinian-Israeli conflict. He's also Christian Palestinian. Khalil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frank, for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, tell me where your family's from.
So my family is from Gaza. I was born and raised in the Gaza Strip up until the 2010, 2009, 2000 war, and then I left in 2010. Lived in the West Bank for the last 11 years, and then I moved to the US in 21. My family remains in Gaza, at least part of it remains there. My father and younger sister were killed during the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And my mother and my younger brother are right now in Egypt. They were evacuated from Gaza.
So let's start with how was it growing up in Gaza? I'm just curious generally overall, before this last war began, obviously, well before that.
So, people assume that before the last war, before October 7th of 2023, things were really easy in Gaza. But the truth is, since I became, aware that about this word, I have been really living in a crisis after crisis living in Gaza. I remember my first memory of interacting with the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the occupation is when the Israeli Air Forces start bombing Gaza in 2001. During the beginning of the Second Intifada, I was just a child and I was terrified by the bombing. And I remember very vividly how terrifying that experience have been. And since then, I haven't had a week or a year in my life in which the Israeli Air Forces haven't bombed Gaza or that they've killed people. And not only were we dealing with the reality of the Israeli occupation bombing, but before 2005 too, we had about 8,000 settlers in Gaza Strip that literally controlled the life of 1 million Palestinians who live there. Back then, we were millions. Right now, we're 2 million people. But literally 8,000 settlers, Jewish Israeli settlers who were living in Gaza, control your life, control your water, control whether you can access your school or not. I remember sometimes that at my honor school where I attended, my teacher wouldn't come to school because what's called the checkpoint between the south and the north of Gaza is closed. And therefore, our class would be canceled. So even your education system is impacted by that. In addition to also a crisis that started after the Hamas took over in 2007, that included a full siege by the Israeli military in Gaza that meant, for example, that you get 6 hours of electricity instead of 24 hours of electricity because Israel doesn't allow fuel to get into Gaza. So all sort of challenges and obstacles were ahead of us way before October 7th of 2023.
So two questions that come out of that, because I hear a lot about the Judeo-Christian heritage. So in the midst of the bombings between 2001 and today, that's quarter of a century of bombings, did they say, now remember, our Christian brothers and sisters are not going to be affected by these bombs. They're not going to be affected by any of these blockades. We're just going to, like they have Iron Dome for themselves. Did they create any kind of Iron Dome for Christians in the occupied territories, or did you guys have to suffer the same fate as everyone else?
The unfortunate reality is that the answer simply is no. We haven't been receiving any privileges or protections by the Israelis. We are killed just like our Muslim brothers and sisters there. And that didn't start even with the Second Intifada, but even before that, in 1980s, when the First Intifada, which was largely peaceful protest against the Israelis, there is a really known story in Gaza in which this one guy, his last name is Tarazi in Gaza, that was walking down the street next to a protest. The Israeli military stops him and beat him to death. A Christian man, an Orthodox Christian guy in Gaza in the 80s was beaten to death for walking next to a protest in Gaza. All my uncles on my mother's side, who happened to be from the West Bank, from Ramallah, were arrested during the First Intifada for protesting, for demanding freedom to the Palestinians, for demanding at that time, the slogan was indeed a two-state solution, for demanding a state on 20% of our historical homeland. They were arrested, thrown in jail for that. Then in Gaza, we were bombed over and over again by the Israeli military. But let me give you another example in which, Christians are impacted by the occupation even more than our Muslim brothers and sisters. especially in Gaza, and that is the issue of demography. Christians in Gaza have been facing an existential crisis due to the fact that their demography is decreasing and the numbers is lacking more and more. And the main issue here is the occupation. Because Christians in Gaza are not allowed to marry anyone but Christians because that's a religious duty, obviously, for Christians, and also Muslims who don't want to marry Christians because that's how it works over there. If you're a Christian and you want to marry someone from the West Bank in Gaza, you're not allowed to bring your wife to the West to Gaza or vice versa. But even if you want to marry, let's say, an American Christian or a Polish Christian or Egyptian Christian, you're not allowed to bring your wife into Gaza. And this engineering of demography in Gaza and in the West Bank have made a lot of Christians leave their homeland. And the same thing right now is happening in the West Bank. And you could look, I lived in the West Bank and I studied theology at Bethlehem Bible College, not really far from Jerusalem. And I couldn't visit the holy sites in Jerusalem because of the Israeli occupation restrictions.
So I hear in American media all the time that the Muslims are the real problem and that they're the ones driving out the Christians from the occupied territories and the rest of the Middle East, and that Israel is their friend. And but you know what? They can't protect them from all those dirty terrorist Muslims. And I don't know what the reality is. You lived there, I didn't. So what's the reality?
So I can tell you what the numbers says first, and then I can tell you my personal experience. So on numbers, the Palestinian Center for Surveys and Policies, run by Dr. Khalil Shaqaqi, has asked this question to about 1,000 Palestinian Christians, which is a sample in which the error for the number would be like a -3 error. So this is a very accurate numbers, and all the people who asked the questions were Christians, and they made sure they're Christians to make sure we get the right results. So number one for the reasons why Christians are leaving Palestine, that includes East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza, was giving due to economical difficulties caused by the occupation. Number two is due to the Israeli occupation forces violent toward them. Number three is due to Israeli settler terrorism that is fighting Christians over and over again. And then when it comes to the whole question of the Muslims, they found that majority of Christians in Palestine don't feel threatened by the Muslims, but they found that a significant minority feel threatened, and that is concerning in itself. About 40% feel that there is certain level of faith, and that's concerning, but it's not by any measure the majority of issues. That being said, that's different than asking a question about how they feel toward what so-called Islamist movements like Hamas and others. For example, the same survey find about 65% of Christians feel threatened by the existence of Islamist groups. And why they feel threatened by what so-called Islamist groups? Because basically, we do have a secular nationalism in Palestine, a secular government that is the Palestinian Authority, under which Palestinian Christians are treated completely equally. Under another, political parties such as Hamas and Islamist and others, although they wouldn't persecute Christians per se, but they would Islamize the public square, and that makes Christians feel unsafe to a certain level. So that has been the numbers. These are the actual numbers. And I can tell you from my personal experience. I lived in Gaza all my life, and it's a majority Muslim area. I did face sometimes like stupid, ignorant questions from certain Muslims. It's the same as growing up like a Jewish person in the South in America. Probably people would ask you and look at you and ask you like, dumb questions. However, I haven't faced any hatred overall by the Muslims there, but I did face certain level of pressure toward Islamization after the Hamas takeover. That's not good, and Christians obviously don't support an Islamist group. But the whole argument that the Muslims are the problem for the Christians in the region cannot pass the any rigorous tests.
So yeah, I want to ask two questions about that. So I totally get what you're saying. So for example, I grew up Muslim, but I'm atheist now. So I wouldn't really want fundamentalist Muslims running the place I live either, right? And so that's Hamas, as opposed to, as you're saying, the Palestinian Authority, which is not fundamentalist Muslim, that runs the West Bank, right? And so that makes perfect sense. So, but between Hamas, which is already bad enough, right? And the Israeli settler terrorists that you mentioned earlier, which one causes more problems for Palestinian Christians?
I would answer simply, it's the Israeli settler tourist. And I tell people that even like, I would go even farther than this, Young, and would say that I would rather live under Hamas regime, despite it being authoritarian, despite it being brutal. And I've been in Hamas jail 3 times as a child, twice for political activism and once for like religious blasphemy. I would still prefer to live under Hamas, despite all of that, to live in apartheid Israel. In apartheid Israel, and not to mention that that's not even the settlers, you are subject as Palestinian and as a Christian to be killed any point by an Israeli military in the West Bank under the Israeli rule, because easily being Palestinian means you are guilty until proven innocent. I can tell you numerous times of Israeli occupation forces stopping me in the West Bank, stripping me naked, beating me up, throwing me on the ground, knowing that I'm Christian and I have a cross tattoo on my hand, and they don't care and they don't really care about all of these. So this is on the government level. On the settler tourism level, it's even worse, because these people literally believe that the Christians and the Muslims are their enemy. And many times they are even go farther to say Christians are more of an enemy, because Christians do not believe in monotheism. They don't believe that God is one. From their point of view, the Trinity is a heresy, and therefore they're driven more with toward violence and terrorism toward Palestinians. You look, they are grabbing lands that belongs to Christians. Today, this is happening in Bet Sahur, a town a couple of miles away from to the east of Bethlehem, where the shepherd field is, and where the shepherds historically believed to have come from to Bethlehem. They are attacking Taiba, a village to the northeast of Ramallah, just few kilometers away from Jerusalem. So there is no debate here that, unfortunately, the Israeli system and the Israeli terrorists are much worse than Hamas. And that not to say that Hamas are good. And I'm on the record saying all the time that Hamas are terrible and I don't want them to rule me.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So is there ever any justice when Christians are attacked in the ways that you describe? Because I've seen some of the stats from the West Bank in particular, and the numbers seem to indicate that no one's ever arrested and faces justice. But I don't know what your experience is.
Let me tell you a story that didn't happen to me, but happened to people who we know. In the town of Berzeit, that's a town very close to Ramallah, historically Christian town. The Christians have been there since the time of Christ. A few weeks ago, Jewish Israeli settlers attacked this older woman, and when they attacked her, and tried to beat her up, she prayed, and she made the mark of the cross, the mark that we all grew up doing as Middle Eastern Christians. And they looked at her and they said, "You're Christian. What are you doing here? That's our land. Go back to France or wherever you're coming from." Here are these settlers coming from Poland or the United States or Russia, wherever they're coming from, looking at Christians that have been there, their ancestors have been there for thousands of years, and telling them to go back to France, wherever. These people are not arrested. The settlers who picked up this woman, and who was arrested? The two sons of this elder woman who tried to defend her. They tried to defend their mom. The Israeli military came and arrested those people. So no, by no means there is any issue where people are arrested, especially in the West Bank when it comes to violence. Now, this is one category of violence that we're talking about. There is another category of violence and persecution. I would call it persecution of Christians that's happening in Jerusalem. And that's different because Jerusalem is officially, by Israeli law, is annexed as part of Israel. That is, quote unquote, the capital of Israel, according to Israeli law. And there are settlers and Jewish extremists spitting on Christians, and they believe that it's their duty to spit on the Christians and on their crosses. And it's happening daily, especially at the Armenian quarter in Jerusalem. And none of them has been arrested. Now, this specific issue when it comes to Jerusalem, it used to be a little bit better before this government. Like, I'm not that to say that Israel was ever really good to Christians, been always terrible. But on this specific issue, in Jerusalem, for example, the previous government would have perhaps tried to arrest some of these people. But today we have the Minister of Security in Israel, that is Mr. Ben-Gvir. He actually believes that these people have the right to spit on Christians because in his mind, that this is a religious duty for them, and he's not arresting any of them. So there is a real issue with Israel, and there is, in my mind, there is a clear system of Jewish supremacy, where if you are Jew, you get all the rights. Or if you are not a Jew, you get no rights.
Yeah, so look, for Jewish Americans, that's gotta sound so strange because no one does that here, right? That's crazy. I've never seen a Jewish person spit on anyone, right? And they'd be horrified at the thought. And so my guess is that they probably will have trouble believing that that happens. And Mike Huckabee in his interview with Tucker Carlson said, "Oh no, this very rarely happens. It's no big deal, and Christians are welcome overall." And so, is Huckabee lying about that? I mean, because you said it happens every day. Like, how often does it happen? I assume it's the religious fundamentalists, not all the Israelis. And I was going to ask you if they're getting arrested, but if they're not getting arrested, are these guys crazy? Because that's going to drive away all Christian tourism. So what's happened here? Is it like, have the religious fundamentalists basically taken over the Israeli government?
So to start with, let's consider the question of the question of Jewish Americans. Of course, our Jewish Americans brothers and sisters are not responsible for any action, as far as I'm concerned, that has to do with the state of Israel, specifically with these extremist factions within Israel that believe that spitting on Christian is okay, etc. However, on the other hand, we can't just turn our faces and ignore the fact that this has been happening daily. And people who are aware of what's so-called religious Zionism within Israel knows well that within what's so-called religious Zionism, that is, Tzayonim Le'umim in Hebrew, have these thoughts for so long. And these are the kind of thoughts that you would find it being taught at, Beit Midrash and others in the settlements in the West Bank. These kind of supremacist ideology are an issue. And if you ask Jewish scholars in the US who have been dealing with those issues, and I can recommend you some names at some point, they will tell you that this is a serious issue and serious debate within those communities. It's a problem. Now, of course, also not all Israelis believe in that. When it comes to the Palestinians, majority of Israelis, unfortunately, are quite radical in the sense that they believe in certain level of violence toward Palestinians. But not all Jewish Israelis are religious, and not all of them also extremists in their religiosity to believe that it's okay to spit on Christians. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. Even if it was like 2 or 3% of the population that are doing this, but it's happening, and it's happening daily in Jerusalem. And it's been ignored by the government. That is the issue. Now, when it comes to Ambassador Huckabee, and I watched the interview with Tucker Carlson, and I cannot help but know that he lives in a bubble in Jerusalem. He lives in a bubble at the American embassy there. He lives in a bubble when he meets only a specific people. I can tell you for a fact that he haven't met with a single Palestinian Christian, except when he went to Taiba to visit. After we demanded over and over again that he should visit the Taiba, after that's a Christian village in the West Bank, after it's been attacked over and over again by Jewish extremist settlers. But he chose, for example, to meet with one Arab Israeli guy. His name is his last name is Shlayan, who is a former Israeli officer and who's running an organization trying to whitewash Israelis' crime toward the Christians in the Holy Land, and emphasizing a unique sort of Israeli Christian Zionism per se. So he lives in a bubble. He meets only with the people, from Christian Zionist organizations like the Christian Embassy and others. And he really lives in a bubble. He doesn't connect to the indigenous the indigenous Christians in the Holy Land. And moreover, he even claimed in his interview that preventing Christians from going to the holy sites due to security reasons, and that we Christians are also susceptible to the idea of suicide bombers. Now, historically, there have been 0 Christian suicide bomber in Israel. So to claim such a thing, it's just extremely bizarre. I don't know in what world Mr. Huckabee lives.
Yeah, it was super weird because he's supposed to be a Christian pastor or something. And in that interview, he kept saying, no, the Israelis really got to make sure that the Christians just can't go to any old church, etc. Because the Christians could be terrorists. There's Israeli settler terrorists all over the West Bank. And you're blaming the Christians? Like, it's maddening. So he also talked about, you can go to any church you like. Is that true? If you lived in the West Bank, could you go to any church you want in Gaza or Jerusalem or anywhere else in Israel?
course, no, you can't. It's impossible. I can tell you, I lived there for 10 years in the West Bank. And that's because Gaza is a whole thing. It's a whole different thing. Although it's part of the Holy Land, historically, Christians are from the rest of what's known as Israel. I mean, my grandpa is not originally from Gaza. He came from a city called Mashdal that doesn't exist anymore today. It was wiped off in 1948. My other grandma from my mother's side is not even from the West Bank. He's from Akko, and he just happened to be visiting Gaza. And then, in 48, he wasn't allowed to return to his home. So people in Gaza are not allowed to visit the rest of the area. And people in the West Bank are the same, except, sorry, if they acquire a specific permit. That is really difficult to get, and many times it's impossible to get. In 2012, I tried to go to celebrate the Palm Sunday in Jerusalem. I was living in the West Bank at the time. I was 18. I tried to go through an Israeli checkpoint to go celebrate this religious holiday. I got arrested by the Israeli military. I was abused. I was there for a night, and then I was released back. So if you try as a Christian without permit to try to access Jerusalem, which by the way it's not even Israel, it's an occupied territory under international law, you'll get arrested, you'll get abused, and you will not be allowed to visit those holy sites.
I mean, the way that the way that they abuse Muslims is already horrific, and we should all be outraged enough by it, right?
Absolutely.
But when American Christians are forced to finance Israel, which has now turned into this religious fundamentalist kind of terror state that bans Christians from going to churches, humiliates them, arrests them, spits on them, etc. It's unreal that our politicians are like, yeah, of course, Christians should be treated that way. They're not precious Israelis. I mean, it's one thing for the Israelis to have like a supremacist point of view about themselves, but what's really weird is American politicians having a view that Israelis are supreme over Christians and others. So it's just so frustrating. But I want to turn back also to more mundane problems, because you mentioned in the beginning, because of the blockade of Gaza, you guys were having massive economic problems, only able to get 6 hours of water, etc. But the Israelis tell us, and the American media repeats this propaganda as if it's true. Well, we left Gaza. We left Gaza, so Gaza was free to run itself, and all of the problems in Gaza are because of the Palestinians. We had nothing to do with Gaza at all. Is that true?
It's actually the opposite, because the way they withdraw from Gaza, and that's well recorded historically, is that when they wanted to withdraw, when Ariel Sharon wanted to withdraw, the entire logic is that we're going to withdraw from Gaza and focus our settlements on the in the rest of the West Bank and expand there. That's one. The second thing, they refused to sit in negotiation table with Abbas, President Abbas at the time, and make it look like the good guys, the guys who believe in peace and coexistence, etc., can win and can get certain concessions. They said, we are withdrawing. At the same time, we're not negotiating two-state solution, etc. We're continuing the siege, and we're continuing to control every single element of your life in Gaza. I'll give you an example. If you are a newborn baby in Gaza, you were just born yesterday, you need to have a specific number that is a national number, national identity number, something similar to Social Security here in the US, that is issued by Israel in order for you to exist as a human being and has passport to travel abroad. And that is issued by Israel. So imagine you're telling me you're left on the one hand, but on the other hand, I need an ID number to go through the Rafah crossing and travel anywhere in the world. And today, some refugees in Egypt who are born, like new kids that are being born there, Israel is not even issuing an ID numbers for them, and therefore they don't exist in the system, and they don't have the right to return, but they do not exist. They are like undocumented. So that has been the case since 2006, since the withdrawal. They didn't allow fuel. They bombed, the electricity generators, etc. Food wasn't accessible. Education materials weren't accessible. People weren't allowed to travel back and forth. So no, they didn't leave Gaza at all. They rather used Gaza as a tool to, on the one hand, show the world that, look, Palestinians can't run a state and therefore we shouldn't negotiate a two-state solution with them. And on the other hand, to keep the Palestinians divided between the West Bank and Gaza. And then Netanyahu would look to the world and say, and he used to say that before October 7th, look, we can't give the Palestinian state because they're divided. And when the Palestinians tried to unite, he would say, oh, look, they're making reconciliation with Hamas, the terrorists. So it's a game that it's in designed by the Israeli government.
Yeah, I mean, that last part there is like such an obvious trick, right? To say, well, I can't do it because they're divided. Oh, they're together? Yeah. Well, they got together with Hamas, so I can't do it. So either way, you can't do it. But not a single national media reporter in America has figured that out. They just reported dutifully like, oh yes, of course, you cannot do it. United or separate, Israel's right about everything. It's absurd. Right.
And that's the sad part, is that the media does not report it, and people don't understand really that the reality is, like, everyone wants to shout about Hamas, right? Everyone wants to shout Hamas is the problem, Hamas is the problem, etc. I was one of the first Palestinians to say on October 7th, right away, that killing civilians, what Hamas have done, is a crime. It's unacceptable for me as a Christian and for me as a Palestinian. We don't believe in that. We don't believe in killing civilians, period. However, no one has said at all that since the 80s, not even since the last 10 years or 20 years, Israel has been so much invested in Hamas. Like, this is your own making. You literally made up Hamas to rise against the PLO, so you divide the Palestinians and that you turn them into extremists and then tell the world, look, they're bad. We can't have peace with them. And it's so sad that despite that this is historical record, so proven, that American media doesn't talk about it. And even sometimes, even us, the Palestinians in the West, don't recognize how many times groups like Hamas are being used by the Israelis to undermine us, because what the Israel is interested in, and I would say this very loudly and clear, is to genocide the Palestinians, ethnic cleansing and get rid of them. What October 7 done, from my point of view, it expedited what Israel always wanted to do. And that's in part why I oppose Hamas and others, because it expedited the process that Israel wants. What I'm interested in is buying more time so Palestinians can construct themselves and work towards liberation.
Yeah. So you just mentioned the Rafah crossing a minute ago. Breaking news is that Israel has closed the Rafah crossing again, and they will start starving the Palestinians again. No food and medical aid in. Why? I mean, what does that have to do with the war in Iran? It has nothing to do with it, but just more aggressive, inhumane, cruel punishment by the Israelis against Palestinian Muslims and Palestinian Christians in Gaza. So last question for you though, Khalil. So a lot of this stuff that you explained, I mean, there's the cutting off the food, the cutting off the water, the electricity, and the beatings and the prisons. But like, especially the parts though, when you explain when they stripped you down to no clothes, when the Israelis were arresting you, and the not allowing the churches and the spitting on the Christians and all these things. It feels like a campaign of not just oppression, but humiliation. And that's the sense I get whenever I talk to any Palestinian, like overwhelming humiliation. Am I hearing that right? And then can you like begin to try to figure out why? I mean, you already are taking the land, you're already oppressing people, you're already not allowing them to have any freedom for 5.5 million Palestinians. Why the extra humiliation?
It's absolutely about the humiliation. There is no question in my mind. Every time they want to strip you down, they want you to, they throw you on the ground, they talk to you in a very rude way, etc. What they're telling you, and they say it sometimes in Hebrew, the word I translate literally, we are the lords of this land. That's the words they use all the time. And you are foreigners here. One time, this one soldier, I tried to just reason with him, just explain to him that I did nothing wrong, etc. And he looked in my eyes and he said, this is the land of Israel. Obviously, that's in the West Bank. It's factually wrong. And you are to obey my order as a Jewish person, since he's a Jewish person. So you hear this over and over again. There is a sense of that you have to submit to their supremacy. In one of the ministers of the Israeli government today, his name is Bezalel Smotrich, published a paper in 2017 called The Decisive Plan, in which he states the following: we have to instigate war in that region, or an intifada or sort, in which we have to push the Palestinians, all the Palestinians, out of what he calls Israel, that is from the river to the sea, including Gaza and the West Bank, except those who accept Jewish supremacy, except those who accept the Jewish sovereignty, he calls it, which I call it Jewish supremacy, because what they mean by Jewish sovereignty means that you have to accept that you are less of a human. And obviously, no Palestinian would accept that. And they know that, because no human being can accept that they're less than another race, and therefore they'll all be pushed out. That is the logic. That's what continues. As to why this humiliation, I think in my mind, the answer is very simple. They want you to leave. That's what it is. They want you to leave. They do everything for us to leave, and that's in their policies. And I can tell you that in 2023, before the genocide in Gaza started, I tried to go back to the West Bank, because that's where I came here for grad school, wanted to go back. And they told me on the border, as I tried to cross from Jordan, you're not allowed back. So I'm not allowed back to my home country. I'm not allowed back to my home country. I was so much in their humiliation there. And yet, despite all of that, wanted to go back and live in my own country and start a Christian family and raise my kids in the Holy Land. And I'm not allowed. And many other people are not allowed as well. All of this humiliation, all of this oppression, etc., has one goal and one goal only: to have the Palestinians gone.
Yeah, to tell Christians they can't go back to Bethlehem or Nazareth, that they don't belong, that they're inferior there, and they must accept the supremacy of the Israelis. And then to have American politicians and media tell us about Judeo-Christian heritage and how we have to support Israel with all of our money because they're our friends and allies. I mean, it's beyond outrageous. Khalil Sawyer, thank you so much for joining us and telling us these stories. It's really important for the rest of the world to hear this, because unfortunately, our media here in America won't ever criticize Israel. And things that are real, things that are lived experiences of people, things that are backed up by facts and numbers, they keep all of that from the American people to make sure that they continue to support Israel, and now against the wishes of the American population. But thank you for shining a light on this and telling us how Christians actually live in the occupied territories. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cenk. Thanks for having me.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.